Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us on today's panel discussion webinar, Think Like a Hacker, Tactics to Identify Gaps in Your IT Security Posture, brought to you by the ITGRC Forum. I'm Kelly Vick, the host of the program, and it's my pleasure to welcome today's speakers. Our moderator is Colin Whitaker. Colin is the founder and director of Informed Risk Decisions. He has over 30 years experience in cybersecurity, and he currently provides cybersecurity risk consultancy services to a wide range of public and private companies. Colin has presented on information security at major events around the world and has published a number of papers on security. And on the panel, welcome Jeff Warren, SVP of Products at Netrix, Joseph Carson, Chief Security Scientist and Advisory CISO at Delinea, Roger A. Grimes, Data-Driven Defense Evangelist for KnowBe4, and Darren Manners, founder of RedSpy 365. We'll get into introductions in a moment, but first, a short housekeeping video. We'll be right back after this.
The ITGRC Forum, educational content for governance, risk management, and compliance professionals. A forum for thought leaders to address today's GRC and IT security topics.
Taking that threat intelligence and using that as an overlay in your existing systems becomes really important.
There is a big difference in service providers versus other third parties that you might be providing data to.
It highlights organizations' lack of preparedness for situations like this.
Here are some housekeeping notes to keep in mind. This webcast is interactive and we want your questions. Please submit these at any time using the Questions tab and we'll address as many of these as possible during the webinar. We've also lined up some polls to get your input and we'll notify you when these are active. So please be ready to submit your response when prompted by using the box below your console. Just make sure the slides are not in full screen mode or you will not see the options. We have uploaded a number of supporting resources in the Attachments tab, so be sure to check those out. We want to hear from you, so don't forget to leave your feedback and comments. We take feedback seriously and it helps us plan for future programs. Today's program is approved by NASBA. To qualify for CPE credit, you must demonstrate participation by attending the full session, responding to the polls, and by rating us at the end. Certificates will be issued within 7 days from our learning management system, the GRC CPE Academy. So please watch out for the email notification and check your spam folder if that doesn't come through. If the presentation freezes, please refresh your browser and close any other live windows to avoid conflicts. After the live presentation, this webcast will be available on demand, so please share with any colleagues who you think will be interested in the topic. And now, let's get started.
Okay, so on today's program, we'll discuss how and why security gaps arise in IT security posture, and we'll address how to run penetration tests to identify the vulnerabilities that exist, analyze vulnerabilities in IT systems, and perform a gap analysis to catch and close gaps as quickly as they open, implement effective security controls, and create a culture of cybersecurity with security awareness training to reduce the risk posed by your employees. Moving on to the agenda. We'll begin with speaker introductions before running over some quick tips recommended by our panel, and then we'll dive into the Q&A discussion facilitated by Colin before closing with takeaways and further information at the end. So now, without further ado, over to you, Colin.
Thank you very much, Kelly, and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. To start with, as Kelly says, we're going to run around this virtual table we have here, and we're going to hear from each of our panelists to tell us a little about themselves and a little about their companies. It'll help everyone listening today or listening later when they download it from the archives to understand the frame of reference of our panelists for this afternoon's conversation. I'm going to start with Roger. Roger's an old friend for doing these sorts of things. Good afternoon and welcome. Can you tell the audience a little about yourself and what you're doing there at KnowBe4, Roger?
Yeah, I've been doing computer security for 34 years. Hard to believe, but I've earned all these gray hairs. I've written 13 books and over 1,300 magazine articles on cybersecurity. I write, if you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll probably get 2 or 3 original articles a week on all kinds of different topics, including multi-factor authentication, fighting social engineering and phishing, password security, all kinds of things like that. I really enjoy my job and working for KnowBe4. At KnowBe4, I'm the data-driven defense evangelist, and KnowBe4 is the leading provider of security awareness training and simulated phishing which means we try to help people educate themselves and their coworkers and their friends and family of how not to be socially engineered. And part of that is through education and videos and stuff like that, and quizzes and games and things like that. And other parts of it are through simulated phishing campaigns. So you can test to see who is phishable or not. And it's, I tell you, I love being a part of KnowBe4 because the most frequent successful attacks is something like somewhere between 40 to 70% or 40 to 90% of all attacks involve some sort of social engineering. So it's really important that you try to prevent from being socially engineered and tricked.
And I know we'll come to that later on in the conversation. So thanks for that introduction, Roger. Well, let's move on to Joe. Joe, good afternoon. Welcome. Tell us about yourself and the work you're doing there at Delinea, sir.
Fantastic. Excellent. And afternoon, good morning to wherever you are in the world. I'm based in Tallinn, Estonia, so that's where I'm joining you from. So it's pretty cold and dark here in the evening. But I've been in the industry not as much as Roger, but not too far behind. I've been close to 30 years in the industry. I started off more in the system administrator side of things, but for the last 20, I've been focusing and dedicated to cybersecurity, really trying to use my knowledge and skills to make the world a safer place, not just for businesses, for everybody. I've also authored several books, including the Privileged Access Management for Dummies and also Cybersecurity for Dummies. I spend a lot of my time doing research, recreating a lot of the attack paths, understanding and reverse engineering some of the techniques that's used, and ultimately, in order to use that research to help create content to help actually organizations and help people to understand about some of the best practices they can put in place to reduce against those risks. The other part of my role is spending a lot of time going to events and speaking and sharing my experience and knowledge. I'm a big fan of hacking gamification, so I'm always, if you're doing Capture the Flag events, you'll probably see me at some of them. And I'm the Chief Security Scientist and Advisory CISO for Delinea, where I've been with the company for the past almost just over 7 years, coming on 8 years. And Delinea is a company, Delinea is a company that's brought together of two former companies. So Delinea is probably a new brand for you or a new name that's coming and that you're getting familiar with. But it was formerly two companies, which was formerly Thycotic, which was really focusing around privileged access vaulting, and also Centrify, which focused around privilege elevation and user elevation for privileges. So bringing both of those companies together really allows Delinea to bring end-to-end privilege access management from basically from the discovery side of things right through in order for the user elevation to the application elevation, and really making sure that those credentials are protected and vaulted and rotated on demand when you need to. So we are actually, great to help organizations really protect the very sensitive accounts and access that sometimes can be the difference between having a major incident.
Thanks very much indeed, Joe. Right, we move on to Jeff. Hello, welcome back, Joe. Tell everyone about yourself and the work you're doing there at Netrix, sir.
Yeah, gladly. It's good to be back. And hello, everybody. My name is Jeff Warren. I am the head of products at Netrix. So I've got about 15 years of experience in the space. My focus is around data security. I actually got my start early on in SharePoint engineering, and that kind of launched my interest into data access governance. So I've spent a large amount of the 15 years helping organizations secure their enterprise data wherever it may reside. And now I have the opportunity to oversee the product portfolio at Netrix, where we have several products to kind of serve that need, helping customers secure their data. So at this point, actually over 15,000 customers globally, worldwide, all shapes and sizes. And I get the opportunity to work with many of them to guide our product direction, learn about what's new, what new challenges are in the space of data security, and shape our product roadmap in that direction.
Brilliant. Thanks very much indeed, Jeff. Finally, but certainly not least, we can move on to Darren. Welcome to the panel, Darren. Tell us about yourself and your company, Red Spy 365, sir.
Well, thank you very much. My background is I'm ex-Navy intelligence. I've been doing security since probably 19. I'm now 51, so you can do the math there. Red Spy was really founded based upon the fact that I would test the company, and about 2 weeks later, this company was breached. And at that point, I said, it sucks. There's something that's got to be better. And so my job was to move penetration testing from a photograph to a movie. And that's really kind of like the whole mindset of how we work. But I hold a number of certifications. Just take away from the fact of that is I enjoy what I do. But really, the founding part of it was the view of we had to go from the photograph to the movie. That's essential in pen testing. I think, the bad guys are coming at you continuously. We have to be able to do that as well. The company itself is obviously new. I always tell people that we're the best company that you've never heard of. But the idea for us is, as you go from being the photographer to the movie director, it enables you to do lots of things. So you can start to add threat intelligence continuously. You can start to build institutional knowledge continuously. So things like, those shelfware documents that you create in compliance or, business impact analysis, you can start to understand and digest them with a continuous test, because we're not just looking at the risk on an asset, we're now looking at the risk to the business. And this is really where the growth of penetration testing moves and the maturity, how it comes through.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Darren. And I know this is going to appear in the conversation as we're going on. So thank you for the introduction. It's really appropriate to this afternoon's conversation. And I think everyone in the audience appreciates we've got a good crop of talent exactly right for the sort of discussion we're going to have this afternoon. So thank you all for joining us. We're now going to move on to look at the quick tips. We always ask our panelists to come up with some basic ideas that they want to get across to people, so that if they take away nothing else from this afternoon, they can take away these tips. And the tips are all focused around aggressively focusing on defeating social engineering, going beyond passwords to secure accounts, evaluate and reducing the attack surface, which is to prevent lateral movement, and finally to think like a machine, which I think is going to be an interesting one for people to get across. So let's bring each of our panelists in turn to talk about these. I'm going to start with yourself, Roger. I may be accused of being a pessimist, Roger. Most people often call me that. But can we really defeat social engineering?
Well, I don't think you can really defeat anything, right? I mean, are we ever going to have 100% patching, or any of the things we do? But I think we can do a significantly better job. The ranges of how much social engineering is involved in hacking range from about 40% to 90%. My studies show about 70 to 90%. Yet the average organization doesn't spend 5% of their IT resources to fight it. So I think people need to do a better job being more aggressive and doing everything they can to defeat social engineering. And that would include policies, technical defenses, and education. I mean, it's a little bit of everything. And I think, also part of trying to defeat that is to use phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication wherever you can. Unfortunately, most multi-factor authentication is easily phishable, as easy as phishing a password. I can ask you for your Google Authenticator code as quickly as I can ask you for your password. And a lot of the malware today automatically steals those authentication codes, and it's built in, automated as part of the product. But there are phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication standards out there, and I think people should use them whenever they can. You're still going to need to use passwords, because if you added up all the multi-factor authentication solutions in the world, they don't work on 2% of the world's websites. And so you're going to still need a password, and you need a strong, long password. And so I think no one wants to create or use different long, strong passwords for every website and service. So I think a password manager, a good, strong, secure password manager, is something that everybody should use to manage their passwords. And then lastly, to patch your computers, unpatched software being abused and exploited is involved in somewhere between 15 to 40% of attacks, depending on the region and who you talk to. It's a really common thing. We're even seeing ransomware, an uptick in ransomware that's using exploits versus password attacks these days. And so people need to better patch their computers, especially anything that's on the CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency's known exploited vulnerability catalog. CISA's known exploited vulnerability catalog is a list of all software that is used to exploit computers around the world. If your software is on that list, it should be patched.
Yeah, absolutely right. Thanks for that, Roger. And we're going to come back to those themes, I know, during the conversation this afternoon. And we're going to go straight on to one of these now. Joe, I mean, the need to move away from passwords has been a mantra I've been following for years, since 2003, particularly with consumer-related accounts and online banking. So we aren't there yet. Why aren't we there yet?
Well, one of the definite things is that, as Roger mentioned, that a lot of these don't work for most of the websites. So really, ultimately, we're still left with passwords. But ultimately, one of the things I talk about is that, there's a misconception about passwords being only, when we talk about privileges and passwords, we really always almost, uniquely think about users. But majority of the passwords are well beyond the users. They're in basically service accounts. They're in machines and hardware and code and infrastructure. And actually, the majority of passwords are stored in infrastructure and are non-human or machine types of identities. So this really allows attackers to go after those. And sometimes it's much easier for them to go after accounts where basically users aren't using them. They can simply just go under the disguise of those applications and services. So one of the things we really need to do is we really need to move beyond passwords. And I know we hear a lot about passwordless, and I'm not a big fan of the term passwordless without context, because passwordless is really about a passwordless experience. As a passwordless authentication experience, you're changing where the password exchange is occurring. So it's really important to move more passwords into the background. What you're doing is you're changing the user experience, or you're changing where the password exchange is occurring, to really make it much more difficult. So there really isn't a password, that can be phished or that can be taken away. And it's really important to use, as one of the things Roger mentioned, long is one of the most important things when we talk about passwords and making it passphrases, where long is one of the most important factors of a password. The longer it is, the much better it is, but with some strength and some uniqueness in there. But absolutely, I couldn't agree more about using at least a minimum of a password manager. But for organizations and larger enterprises, it's more important to move into using privileged access. And what that allows you to do is make sure you're using MFA with privileged accounts. You're able to rotate those credentials, monitor activity, record the activities of those privileged sessions, and also better into the auditability. What we're really trying to do here is make it as challenging as possible for attackers so that they create more noise in the network, giving us an ability to actually see them, to bring them to the surface so that we actually prevent them from doing damage.
Yeah, brilliant. And the point about technical passwords, service account passwords, is spot on. As the panel know, I was reading the SANS vulnerability alerts this morning, so just before the call, and there is one there which talks exactly about these technical credentials being exposed through one of these vulnerabilities. So it's really, really critical point. So thanks for stretching that, Joe. Jeff, let's move on to yours. And the point about escalation and privilege escalation and lateral movement is spot on. So tell us more about it and why it's important to reduce that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I agree with what the other panelists are saying here. I think a good place to start is gaining as much of an understanding of what your risk is, so you know what to secure. You can't really secure what you don't see. So certainly encourage everyone listening to perform a risk assessment. There's plenty of ways to do it. There's tools that are free and openly available that help you do it. There's obviously a lot of third-party solutions out there as well. And once you identify that, typically what you'll find is there's way too much access, and you can reduce your attack surface by removing privilege that exists within the organization. Do you really need all those administrator rights? Some you do, and you'll move to the password vault like we're talking about here. Others you may be able to remove entirely. So identify your risk surface, start to trim away what you don't need, and reduce that overall attack surface, which is going to help prevent lateral movement and the attacks that nearly all ransomware today is following to land and spread throughout your organization. And if you can layer on top of that a discovery and awareness of where your most important information is, your crown jewels, your intellectual property, then that starts to give you that extra context of risk. So now you can make sure you're focusing your efforts on what matters the most, because there ultimately will be a lot of attack paths to protect within your organization. So find what matters, protect it, and reduce the attack paths as much as possible.
Brilliant. Thanks for everything, Jeff. Finally, Darren, I think what you're really trying to say, that the attacks are moving at machine speed and we've got to think like machines. Is that the correct interpretation I should put on your tip?
Yeah, I think we have to automate where we can. If you think we have a static security posture, kind of like a Maginot line, it's not very sort of flexible. It doesn't go up or down as things change or as new risks come out. But really, I think the game changer is going to be with AI. I think AI machine learning. And the problem is going to really come into it where I always think that the bad guys are going to be able to do this better than the good guys. They're crowdsourced, they're funded, they're more motivated, they love technology, where you got the defenders on the opposite side of things who are sort of underfunded, overworked, not going to get anything real for their bang for their buck if they do learn this new technology. And the problem is going to be that what we've seen in the past, if we're always preparing for the battlefield of the past, then we're going to be very caught out by the battlefield of the future. And I think AI is going to teach us a lesson as we go forward. And the problem is how do we get a grips, and how do we incorporate that into sort of defensive systems or defensive mentality, even when we're going to start to look at the speed of a machine and thinking at the speed of a machine. So we've got to be able to defend at the speed of a machine as well.
Yeah, very true. And the attacks are, you're absolutely right. They're not slowing down, they're speeding up, and we're going to need to be able to respond in machine time rather than human time. So yeah, it's a very, very appropriate analogies. Thanks very much, Steve, for that, Darren. Okay, that really, those quick tips really set up the conversation this afternoon really quite nicely. We're going to leave the headshots up there and also our cameras up so you can see who's speaking, but also this provides a reference to who we represent and what we're talking about. I want to remind everyone that this is interactive. You, the audience, are part of the conversation, and I'd encourage you to try and put your questions forward, and I'll feed those through to the panel as we're going along. We've already got 2 through, so that's a good start at this stage. So thank you for those questions. I just want to get my 6 pennyworth on the table. From my bio, you can see I was an Army officer, and lots of things I learned all those years ago, going back to the early 70s, have stuck with me. And so when I talk to people about security, I use military terms like threat, enemy, attackers, and all these sorts of words. It could be a bit disconcerting for some of my clients, but they could get to understand where I'm coming from eventually. But one of the key things I learned when I was young was if I'm going to defend a position, I have to go out there and look at the position from the enemy's point of view. How are they going to attack me? What are their avenues of advance, and how are they going to do my position in? Therefore, how can I defend myself against them? And that's what we're really talking about today, is understanding how the attackers are going to do what they're going to do to you so you can stop them doing it to you in the first place. And that's a really important message for anyone who's taking up cyber defense for their enterprise in the future. But I think we really start at the very beginning on this. And one of the most significant threat vectors, as was mentioned right in the quick tips, was this issue of phishing and everything that's coming down the line at people across their email and other channels as well these days. So Roger, let me turn to yourself. After over 30 years of trying so hard, why is it so hard for vendors to recognize and stop email spam and phishing?
Yeah, it's almost like saying, how come we can't stop all crime, right? There's a lot of it, and there's so many different ways that it can occur, but especially in social engineering and phishing, it's so different. And when you have a technical tool, you're trying to say, well, if there's, let's say with a phishing email or something, well, it has this look, it could have these keywords, it could have this rogue link or something. And it could take years to train a system to get really good and accurate at recognizing a particular type of phishing email, but literally takes seconds for an attacker to go, oh, that's what's not working. Let me make this one change. Like I saw today that I've seen a bunch of times is where it's just this message going, hey, you owe this bill. And if you don't think you owe this bill, call us. It can be, so there's not really even a malicious link for them to go in and see where it goes. It's just a phone number, and that phone number is probably just something that they created. And it can come so many different ways, right? It's email, it's SMS, it's chat, it's social media, it's in person, it's phone calls. That's part of the big thing. And the theme and what's being done can be done so many ways. They're all usually trying to get either money or information of some sort. But there's so many different ways to do it. Again, it's like trying to say, how can we stop all robberies? It's just so much of it in so many different ways it can be done.
Yeah, I will say that I actually think some of the spam filters are getting better than they have been in the past, particularly from the open source email products, far better than they used to be. But you're also right in saying they come down through channels other than email. I've actually seen some phishing emails come as phishing snail mails, which is also a concern for some organizations, particularly more traditional ones who've got to find ways to actually handle both the old paper methods and the electronic methods. So thanks for that. Once the enemy has a foothold in your network, the next thing they're going to try and do is they're going to try and move laterally. As Jeff was talking about, they're also going to try and escalate privileges so they can do more things in your network. So Joe, what are some of the common techniques attackers are using to elevate these privileges, and how do we reduce that risk within our organizations?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, one of the most common things is that we tend to give users too much privileges to begin with. And ultimately, when they gain that initial access, I've worked in many incident response in the past, and unfortunately, that initial access is already some type of privileged user. They're either a local administrator, they're either a person who has access to sensitive data within a database, Or what they end up doing is they go and store all the sensitive credentials in a clear text file on the desktop, or they go and store it in the browser. Basically, unfortunately, it's great we talk today about security by design, but we really need to move to security by default, where security is actually on and enabled and turned on. So unfortunately, with the browsers, you install it and they're not secure by default. You can simply just go, if you can access to users, initial access, you can simply open up the browser and go and look at the password store in the browser. And because passwords, the browser loves passwords, it loves cookies, and it will store all of those, frequently every time you go to a site. So the attackers know all of these places where they're being stored. They will likely look for them. They'll find the different types of, passwords that you use, and will actually try to then crack additional passwords or accounts that you use, because we tend to, as humans, we choose the simple and easy path, and we will reuse passwords over and over again for different accounts. Unfortunately, one of the other things is if they gain access to a user who does have local administrator access, it's only a matter of time before they're able to then elevate that up to a domain administrator, or being able to find service accounts across the environment. One of the techniques that attackers use, for example, with a local administrator, is they can disable security on that one device. And they will hide their tracks really effectively. They will hide it so that you will not know that they were on that machine. And ultimately, what they then try to do is lure somebody who has higher level privileges to log onto that machine. They might delete some files, they might cause some problems, and ultimately trying to get somebody who will basically be alerted that there's a problem in this machine. They will log on, they will fix the problem, and then leave. And unfortunately, they will leave a footprint of their actually administrator credentials, typically a domain administrator or a higher level administrator access. And ultimately, the attacker now basically is able to capture those credentials, laterally move on to another machine, or basically reuse the hash across the environment. And this is some of the most common things is we tend to leave footprints of credentials and passwords and hashes all over the environment. And it only takes the attacker to get that one foot in the door to be able to go and discover those, find them, and abuse them. In order to really reduce the risk against those, we really have to start getting into the point where we're not using privileges everywhere at all the time. We have to move to the principle of least privilege. We have to make sure if we're using domain credentials, we rotate them after every use. We got to use multi-factor authentication, not just on the external perimeter, but also in the internal systems that we have internally. So trying to use MFA as much as possible, and use it with a risk-based approach as well, so that you're not causing friction, that you're actually making sure that they're actually able to use it with a good balance of security and productivity as well. And also try to use privileged access management. This is one step beyond just using a password manager. It's where you start actually making sure that it's not just about storing a user and password in a vault, but it's also about enabling seamless access to target systems as well. So they don't even need to know the password. And it uses different security controls to make sure that you really are who you're saying you are. And that makes sure that we reduce privileges and get to the where I refer to it as the zero persistent privileges, where it's privilege on demand and not just not persistent all the time.
Brilliant. Thanks very much indeed for that, Joe. We're now going to our first poll, because I know someone was asking when we were going to our first poll. Well, the first poll is now live. We like these polls. These polls are very important because they provide context for the discussion, and they provide some insights from you, the audience, that our panelists can leverage to talk more in depth about some of your responses. So we look forward to seeing what you have to say about this poll, all about where you think the greatest risks lie within your organization. And while you're thinking about that, we know these attack techniques we've been speaking about, such as the ones that Joe's mentioned, and phishing, etc. We know they've been around for years, but there must be tools out there that help us defeat these techniques. So, Jeff, are there any free tools, because everyone wants to reduce costs out there, that can help discover how much security risk my company has, so I can help defend against it?
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully you can hear me okay. I just got a network.
Yes, you can.
Okay. So, I think it's important to know your enemy, know your adversary. And if you look at tools that ransomware is actively using, they're using these free tools once they land on one system. This ransomware these days are human operated. And once they get there, two tools that have been run by a most prevalent strain of ransomware called Lockbit 3.0 include a tool called Bloodhound, which does attack path mapping through the network. This helps the adversary land on one system. and find how they can elevate those privileges and move from point A to point B, ultimately getting domain admin access usually is the target. So you can run this same tool within your network to find those same attack paths and begin to shut them down. And the other tool is something called Seatbelt, which is more of a host level tool that you can run against a particular target host, and it will export all of the potential attack vectors where people could export SSH keys, cookies from your Chrome browser that could provide elevated access to your Azure system, other things along those lines. So by running these two tools, you can stay one step ahead of the attackers who are ultimately going to use the same against you.
Yeah, in other words, understanding what tools are out there is going to be really important as we go forward. And therefore, it's not just keeping a check of the attacker techniques, but also what techniques they're using that you can use to help defend your network is what you're really focusing in on there, isn't it, Jeff?
Exactly. Yeah, you got it.
Yeah. The results of the poll are in there, Jeff. It's interesting to me that most people are really concerned about the cloud security controls. Is that something that you see from your clients and what you think they should be really concerned about?
Yeah, it is. I think a lot of organizations have moved rapidly into the cloud, and sometimes security has lagged behind a little bit. So it's a balance of how do you leverage native controls available within your cloud providers. Many organizations now are multi-cloud, so you're managing multiple sets of native controls, looking at maybe third-party solutions that can help you provide a single pane of glass view. And the other challenge is these native controls are constantly shifting and evolving. So how do you keep up with what's new in Azure, what's new in AWS? So sometimes the pace of the business security team. So I have seen that myself.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Steve, for that. For those who are worried about polls, we're having another one now. The next poll is all about implementing continuous penetration testing in your organization. And while you do that, let's dig deeper into the issue of penetration testing. Clearly, testing our defenses is essential because that's what penetration testing does. It allows you to do, as I say, stand on the attacker's side to see what your defenses are like. But how deep should a penetration go, Darren? I mean, how far into your network? Is it just the perimeter or should it go all the way deep into the network?
What I think you want to prove is that you're the onion, not the egg. You want to be able to test the layers as you go through and test the controls as you go through. I mean, I saw in the quite one of the questions was about ChatGPT for email phishing. That's a great example because we use ChatGPT now to create some phish emails. In fact, you can ask it to create a HTML email based upon tax, but don't mention the word tax, financial, or any other keywords that might bypass spam filters. So we're already using those kind of technologies. But you want to be able to prove that your controls are working and validate those controls. And also validate the alerting process to make sure that the thousands of alerts that you're seeing aren't just noise. But you want to be able to pick out when a pen tester does something that you can pick that part out and say, that's the pen tester right there doing X or his part of work. Because if we go in as the known bad, and if you can't see the known bad, then you're certainly not going to see the unknown bad.
Yeah. I think that's one of those telling points about the whole issue of penetration testing is being able to test that your alerts are working. People often mix up penetration testing with vulnerability testing, don't they? And I think the important thing about what you're saying is it's not just about the vulnerabilities. It's can you detect activity in the first place? Is that a way of describing it?
No, it's an exact way of doing it. In fact, we use vulnerability scanning as well as obviously defenders use vulnerability scanning, but they're just looking at it from a different perspective. I look at it to be able to break in and go beyond that initial attribution point to get into deeper things, whereas they're just looking to fix the initial attribution point. But really, you got to think about it. Everything is about depth versus time. Now, that is why traditional testing has always been a problem, because you've only got so many tokens you can use in that so many period of time. So the bad guys are coming at you 24/7, yet you're only going to test once a year. And part of that was that really there was no value to going beyond that. There was no institutional knowledge being added into the system. There's no understanding of compliance. There's no, a traditional one-off test. I go on site, I do a test, I leave. There's no skin in the game in it for me. Continuous testing, you've now got skin in the game.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's go on to the answers to the poll. I'm encouraged to see that about 47% of people are currently doing continuous penetration testing within their organizations. I would guess that you are relatively reassured by that, particularly when you see that 33% are planning to do so?
Absolutely. I think people understand that, as you start to look at costs and risks, and, people now are starting to look at the tools they have in place and are they getting the maximum value from those tools or services that they have. People are starting to understand, okay, where does penetration testing fit in this? How can I get the biggest bang for my buck? And if you move from a one-off test to a continuous test, you get a much higher return on investment.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thanks very much, Darren. And I think whether we like it or not, password's going to be around here for some time, not least because of Joe's very astute observation that we all should all be aware of and forget at our peril that passwords are inherent within all these technical and service accounts we're dealing with. So from a defense strategy perspective, how long should a password be? So I'll give Roger a chance to give you his 6 penny worth. Everyone's mentioned as long as possible, but how long should they be and how strong should they be?
Well, I've looked, there's all kinds of different password attacks, and a lot of attacks don't care how long or strong your password is, right? If you get socially engineered out of it, they don't care what your password was. But if they have to guess at it or do what's called password hash cracking attack, it does make a matter. It does matter how long or strong it may be. And I go with other people saying, long passphrase is better than a super complex password. But I know of people, hackers, that are routinely guessing 18-character passwords, routinely, and they're not even the uber hackers of the world. So I tell people, in order to if you want to make your password resistant to all known password attacks, especially password hash cracking and password guessing, your password has to be 20 characters or longer, which nobody wants to use. So that's why, and you need supposedly, and you do need to use a different password for every website and service. That's why I recommend something like a password manager or some passwordless solution or privilege management solution, because nobody wants to create or use a 20-character or longer password. So I say don't. Use some other tool that will do it for you.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem, isn't it? Because even the NIST guidance, and certainly in the UK, the National Cybersecurity Guidance, is talking about 15-character passwords. And it's difficult enough to remember 15-character passwords, let alone 20-character passwords, which is why using passphrases or something meaningful for that person is going to be important. So, yeah, it's a challenge out there. And, of course, the more we use for the service accounts, we ought to be using computer-generated passwords, because at least we guarantee a generation of length and complexity that we wouldn't get from a human's doing it, wouldn't we, Roger?
Yeah, no, absolutely right. Again, if you create a password out of your head, it needs to be 20 characters or longer, which is kind of insane, especially if you have to have a different one for every website and service. Yeah. And that's why really we recommend using something else. And then and actually coming quantum computers, sufficiently capable quantum computers, they're going to have cut in half the protection of passwords, which means it's going to be it's already an insane requirement at 20. It's going to be worse than that pretty soon. So, we've all long known that we needed something besides passwords. We do. It's long overdue. We just need to get the user base there.
Yeah, and it's going to be some time before we do that. So let's go on to look at the third poll of the day. And this really builds on what you were saying about tools and supports. One of the clear tools and supports being used is password managers and so on. And I know that's been a theme of the conversation and the questions from the audience already. And we'll come back to that in a moment, I'm pretty sure. So we'd like to understand how you go about protecting privilege accounts, whether you use vaults or password managers or anything at all. So while you do that, Joe, it's over to you, right? You've got the $65,000 question. Is a password manager enough, or is it even a bigger risk to store passwords in a single vault?
Absolutely. I think I noticed a few questions also from the question in the audience as well related to this.
Yeah.
The important thing here is it's going back to one of the things that Jeff mentioned earlier, is you got to know what risk it is that you're protecting. Everything has different risks. So you have to know what it is you're protecting and what the risk is if it's ever compromised. And then you want to make sure that whatever it is you're putting in place has the right level of protection for that. And the important thing here goes, not all password managers are equal, and not all MFA is equal. They all have different benefits and different strengths and different weaknesses. So it's really important to make sure that when you're putting something in place, one of the big differences between, for example, password managers and privilege access is password managers, you're still delegating some responsibility to the person who's using it to make the right security decisions. And you want to make sure also that the security of the access to the password manager is also as strong as you need to make sure you're reducing the risks even further. So it's really important to make sure that not all password managers are equal. And you want to make sure what security controls and whether you're centralizing the decision making into something like a privileged access management solution, which means that the user doesn't need to think about security, they just need to consume it and use it, which means that you got to move and start thinking more about frictionless experience, moving to zero friction security, which is all about where the user has much more easier to use and much more, they benefit without having to make security decisions themselves. So this is really where absolutely a password manager is better than having all your accounts using the same password and making sure that you put the right protection on, in front of the password manager. And now you get into where, one of the things that Roger was mentioning about the length. I've got a password cracking machine to my right here, which basically, 18, 20 character passwords, 25 minutes. And I only need to crack one. I don't need to crack all of them. I just need to get one that gets me access into the environment. So, it comes down to a majority of things, you'll probably crack about 20% the hashes that you get. So it's really important that we actually make sure, where possible, that humans are no longer creating passwords. The fewer passwords humans are creating, the less passwords it is possible for attackers to crack and gain access. So this is what's really important. It's all about reducing the risk. It's about choosing which solution is mitigating the risk, and also getting to that zero friction security, where it's getting the balance between security and productivity as well, and moving more security into the background is really what we're trying to achieve here.
Yeah. Okay. We got the answers in about how people go about protecting their privileged accounts. It's interesting that and reassuring that 44% of them use 2FA or multi-factor authentication. What's your spin on the answers from the audience?
I think concerning is that using a password manager, only 21% uses a password to protect it, and I think that's a concerning amount. I would expect hopefully more would be moving to using a combination of both password managers and multi-factor authentication. And the shocking part here is for privileged access, not many is recording these sessions, and very few are doing all of the above, which is a concern as well. Only 5% are using all of those, and for privileged access, that should be really the default, as all of them. But at the same time, making it frictionless. You want to make sure that you're doing, dynamic security on demand. I always call privileged access is almost like a polygraph test, a digital polygraph test, where you want to make sure you're asking the right questions, but those controls are in the background to make sure that the access is authorized and seamless as possible, but making sure only those who should be getting access. So I'm concerned that only 5% are doing all of them, but at least some good results is that some people are moving in the right direction. So hopefully this is an upward trend.
Can I just mention one thing you mentioned as well, which I think was absolutely spot on? I mean, all this concern about password managers and the threats being directed at password managers around the place. The point that you made, which was absolutely spot on, it's all about risk assessment. What worries me is that far too many people automatically assume that because of the stories in the press, all these tools are bad. In the end, it's about what is you're trying to protect for what purpose and how are you using it. Would you agree with that view?
Absolutely. It comes down to, if you decide to use a password manager, you want to make sure you protect it as best as you can with the right controls in front of it. So, and it's also, de-risking. You might choose a certain level of password managers for a certain amount of your employees who are using it for everyday use, versus another type of password manager that might be, on premise in a secure, vault that basically is used for internal purposes only. So it comes down to determining the risk and determining what's the right solution to mitigate that, and making sure that the how you're mitigating it doesn't become an additional risk, that you're putting more security controls in front of it.
In the end, you have to make your own risk assessment of the products you're using. Absolutely spot on. Brilliant. Thanks very much for that. Right, let's move on then. We understand passwords are bad. We understand lots of people using MFA, but how effective is MFA in preventing breaches? Jeff, what's your view? Is it the silver bullet? I've certainly seen some very positive results when we deployed MFA in protecting online banking in UK.
Yeah, and MFA is great, and I definitely wouldn't say otherwise. And it gives you that quick time to value. It's one of the quickest ways to bolster your security. I think it's important to understand where the MFA value ends. So it's great for interactive logons, like logging onto your bank account, logging onto a web portal, logging onto your Okta or SSO provider. But where MFA may not help you is in the non-interactive logons. So if you look at how ransomware operates, once it lands on a desktop, a lot of what it does is non-interactive. It uses PowerShell or WMI or command line interfaces to move from one system to the next. And that's going to bypass most MFA controls. In addition, if you use MFA and an attacker gets onto your desktop, they can steal browser cookies and other things that have that MFA check all baked in. So if they want to take over your Azure account that's protected with MFA, all they need to do is steal your browser cookie and your primary refresh token, and now they're able to log on. And all those conditional access claims that you put in place, those are already behind them. So they're able to blaze ahead. So MFA is great, but it's not a silver bullet.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much, Eve, for that. We're now going on to our final poll of the day, everyone. We're asking you how you use MFA to protect your organization's logon accounts today. And if so, what sort of MFA you use to do so. And Roger, this gets your chance to come back on the whole MFA issue. While people are answering that poll, you mentioned the idea of using phishing-resistant MFA. Can you give us a better understanding of what you mean by phishing-resistant MFA and how that might be deployed in an enterprise?
Yeah, there's a bunch of different ways you could socially engineer and phish and bypass multi-factor authentication. I wrote a book on it. I write at least one column a week on it. But probably 95% of multi-factor authentication, the stuff that most people use, is as easy to hack or bypass as a password. And usually it would involve someone being sent a phishing link, or they get an email saying, we need you to log in here, something that would motivate them to use the MFA solution. But they don't notice that the rogue URL isn't going to where they think it's taking them to. So they get taken to what's called a man-in-the-middle website. And then that man-in-the-middle website can either steal the MFA information, or it can steal the resulting cookie after they successfully log on to the legitimate website. And there are MFA solutions where the man-in-the-middle attacks don't work, like anything that's called FIDO-enabled is a good example of that. But not only am I saying not to use easily phishable MFA, the U.S. government's been saying not to use it since 2017, and they define it as anything that is based upon your phone number, SMS-based MFA, anything that sends you a one-time password code like you might get with Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator, or push-based authentication. So the definition the U.S. government has said that is easily phishable MFA that you should not be using includes, again, the vast majority of the stuff that people use. And again, the whole reason we're supposed to be moving to multi-factor authentication is because passwords are too easy to steal and bypass. But if the MFA solution that you're using is just as easy to steal or bypass as a password, well, that was a lot of effort for not a whole lot of bang for the buck. And some people go, well, it's really protecting us today. Well, it is, but I would think that using any MFA probably cuts down, at least overall 50% of attacks, which is huge. That's huge. That's the reason why you should be using MFA. But attackers are increasingly thinking people are using MFA, and even their automated malware. There's the most popular phishing kits today include phishing MFA built into the kit. So it doesn't, you don't have to be a special skill or a special hacker. It's just the way that it operates and works. And we're certainly only going to see an increase in that as MFA becomes more and more popular. So I tell people, if you've got the choice and you're moving to MFA, try to use a phishing resistant choice. They're out there. I write about them all the time. It's just that most people aren't using them right now. And then part of that is that most vendors aren't offering them. But eventually that will change. It's going to have to change because everybody's going to move to MFA, and then it's not going to stop the phishing. So they're going to have to go to something a little bit better.
The results are in, and I think you're going to be disappointed in them because 64% of them are using a phishable form of based on a code or prompt sent to the user's telephone. So that clearly would give you some concern, I would guess.
Yeah, and let me say that's what I kind of expected to see, because the most popular forms, again, Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator, and one of the Google or Microsoft push options, and SMS based are the most popular ones, but they've been being compromised for as long as they've been in existence, and are going to continue increasing numbers and percentages to be compromised even more. So that's why we have to get people to the more phishing resistant options. A lot of times you don't have the option, right? You're told, if I'm working like my bank uses a push based application. I don't have a choice. That's the way it works. But I tell people, if you have a choice and you're going to go to MFA, try to use an option that is not as easy to phish as some of the others.
Okay, thanks for that, Roger. That's a really useful tool. I would tend to agree with you. It cuts down the low-hanging fruit, but I think in the future we're going to look at, we're in an arms race. Unfortunately, we got ahead of the curve, the attackers, in respect of being able to deploy MFA in the first place. They're catching up. We're going to need to bolster our defenses to make sure our MFA is even better in the future, aren't we? So I think that's what we're coming at from that. Okay, so if we think MFA is a valuable tool, if not the silver bullet we thought it was, we got to remain vigilant. But is it enough to declare that we can cut some corners of pain? So one of the areas of concern always is password rotation, particularly when we come to service accounts. So, Joe, do you think password rotation is dead if we've got MFA out there?
Absolutely. This was one that was quite debated for the last couple of years and still is debated, is that some of the recommendations that came out when MFA was becoming much more popular was you no longer need to rotate, because we used to have rotate every 30 days and every 60 days for at least user-based passwords, and that become very painful, and that's why we get into this reusing small variations of the same password over and over again. So the recommendation came, if you're using MFA, then you don't need to rotate your password. And this became widely debated in the security community. And for me, it just means that if you're using MFA and having a good password, I still think that you should be rotating passwords, maybe not as frequent, maybe not every 30 days, but maybe every 6 months, maybe every 9 months. So you should at least rotate it. And if you're using a password manager or privileged access, that can be done automated. You don't even need to do it yourself. You can have the solution do it for you. But one of the things about still password rotation is that sometimes it can actually help you identify that you've been breached. Because if you're not basically rotating and your MFA's been compromised, whether somebody has already enrolled another device using an MFA and you don't even know about it, this can actually be a significant trigger to help you uncover an attacker on your network. So it's really important to make sure that you do rotate passwords, not as frequently, but you want to make sure that you're doing it in order to make sure that it's not, MFA isn't your last protection. You want to make sure that you're actually doing it in conjunction. And then you get into the non-human or the machine types of accounts. Those passwords can be rotated as frequently or after use, because no human needs to use them, and they can be as long as they possibly need to be. Whether it being 128 or 256 characters, whatever that system will take. So for the non-human ones, you want to get your password disclosure rate as down as possible. So less amount of people in the organization know the passwords, and only use them to gain access when they need to, and then the passwords rotated immediately. So for user-based accounts, password rotation is definitely not dead, but it's not as frequent as it used to need to be. But for service accounts and non-human accounts, they can be rotated as frequently and should be as often as possible.
Okay, thanks very much, Steve, for that, Joe. Well, this is the ITGRC forum. It says so on the screen. So I think it would be prudent for us to understand how the governance, risk, and compliance aspects impact these issues about looking at it from the attacker's perspective. So let me turn to yourself, Darren. I mean, penetration testing is one of those things that's invasive and gives people some concern about what it's doing to the network. So, are there governance, risk, and compliance issues which are important to consider when one's conducting a penetration test?
Well, I think there's two ways to look at it. Yes, I mean, I always tell people that I'll guarantee that I'll never damage anything if I never send a packet there. You don't know if there's some kind of logic flaw on a web application that you press the space bar 6 times and the whole office blows up. I mean, there's just no guarantee in that. However, also the other thing is as well, flip that round on its head. Governance, risk, and compliance. What I tend to see are symptoms of control object failures. So if you look at it and you move to that continuous environment, you can now start to digest those governance, risk, and compliance questions. So we build in SIG into our system so that we can understand, okay, we've seen a technical symptom occur. This is usually a control object failure, and we can dynamically map the technical symptom that we see to the control object failure. So we understand what the management is saying they're doing. And if you think pen testing and how pen testing works is, it's a bottom-up approach. I don't care what you say you do. I just look at what you are. And so the governance, risk, and compliance is that top-down approach that looks at what you say you do, and in pen testing hopes it meets in the middle and you are what you say you do. But when you start moving into a continuous environment, you're actually able to digest those particular shelfware products, things like the governance and compliance questions that no one loves to fill out, and actually build that into, the program, the continuous pen test program, so that you could work with GRC and be able to map to their control objects as well as test them, obviously.
Well, what it's moving towards is an issue of control effectiveness, continuous control effectiveness testing, isn't it? And that's where we need to be moving to, because you've got these controls out there. We actually test them once a year through an audit or something else, or a pen test. But continuous evaluation of a control's effectiveness must be the holy grail, shouldn't it?
Well, it is, but you imagine there's so many ways you can test a single control. So it's much like, antivirus. There's so many ways you could defeat antivirus or behavioral-based analytics. So now you've got to work out, okay, how much content can I put in there? And this is where places like Ancestry.com are quite interesting, because they have this data set of, content mapped to another data set of what you're looking for. And really, if you think about it, that is exactly what we do. We have a data set of the client, and we have all this risk and all these attacks and all this kind of problems out there. So as we know the data set of the client, we need to be able to map that risk continuously and start to understand it and digest it. But yeah, I think as you see things go forward, I think you're going to you're going to see shelfware, things like business impact analysis, where we start to digest institutional, because typical pen testing sucks. You go there, you do a test. I know nothing about that asset apart from what I see. I don't know where it sits in the business, but if I had that institutional knowledge, that BIA, I can maybe say that medium risk is now a critical risk based upon the business process. I can also turn around and say, well, hold on a second. That control object, the management said they were doing X, therefore it's fading. We need to address that, or we're going to be on a hamster wheel of death.
Yeah. Understanding the business context is going to become even more important to provide value added in any pen test, in my view. There's nothing worse than getting results which aren't reflective to the organization. Yeah, thanks for that, Darren. That's really, really valuable reply. We've all talked about what it looks like from the attacker's perspective, and there are some low-hanging fruit that we can certainly pluck to try and protect some of our defenses. We've heard some of that already from Jeff. So I'll hear a little bit more, Jeff, about what some of the easiest things one can change in one's enterprise to improve security that won't cause any disruptions to the business. And when you finish, it'd be very useful if you could tell us what those tools were again, because your audio blipped and some people didn't actually pick up the names of the two tools you mentioned earlier on as well.
Sure, yeah, I'll go back to that. And I think that's relevant to the question. So, a lot of the solutions we're talking about today are great, but if your organization's not ready to roll out MFA or password vaulting or data access governance, that takes business alignment, it takes user education. If you want some quick wins of what you can do, then I would say one thing is running a security assessment with the tools that I mentioned. Those were Bloodhound, that does the attack path mapping, and Seatbelt, that does the host level vulnerability checking, right? So that's one good place to start. That shows you what your highest level exposure and risk is and how an adversary can get from point A to point B. Every organization is different, so that will really make it personal for what your risk is. And then the other low-hanging fruit I would mention is, we've talked a lot about passwords, and you might come up with a great strategic roadmap forward, but you should leverage strong password policies right away today. If you're using Active Directory, if you're using Azure Active Directory as your identity store, there's native capabilities you can use. Make sure you're using things like fine-grained password policies on your domain administrator accounts. And even if strong, unique passwords that aren't in breach dictionaries aren't going to solve every problem, still could be phished and things like that, it's going to make that barrier a little bit higher as you work towards building out your longer term strategy for your security within your organization.
Brilliant. Thanks very much for that, Jeff. I think the kicker of all of this is what's happening in the future. And Darren touched on a bit of this earlier when he was talking about thinking like a machine. So this is your chance, Darren, to tell us all about, is machine learning or AI going to help us, or it's going to kill us? Which is it?
I think the way it's going is going to kill us, to be honest. I mean, I don't see us responding as quick as what the bad guys are going to be able to use it. So
I was accused of being a pessimist.
Well, I'm a realist. I'm an evidence-based tester. So if you think about it, corporations, who's going to be the more incentivized? Is it going to be the guy sitting at a corporate, or is it going to be a bad actor? The bad actor's got way more incentive to use ChatGPT and be able to automate processes. The old offensive security, if you ever gone through the OSCP exam, was always try harder. And actually, if you couldn't try harder, you could try faster. And, in fact, Rob Joyce, 2016, Usenix, he was talking about these guys are coming at you 24/7, 365. You got to act accordingly. Now you couple that with what we know now with AI. Can you imagine sort of the battlefield that we're going to be starting to move in towards?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, I think some of the concerns about how they might leverage these techniques, and we've already mentioned ChatGPT for generating phishing action against us, but there are lots of other things out there they'd be using. And certainly, the data sets they've got are sufficiently large where they can do a lot of machine learning from. So I think your point's well made. We've certainly got time to go through some of the audience questions now, and I've got some of them flagged up already for my panelists. Roger, I want to turn to yourself first, because this whole issue about MFA solutions being easy to bypass, etc., and the role of password managers in trying to complement these discussion is something that's really got people's attention. So can you give us your view on, continue to give your view on MFA solutions and how and why they're easy to bypass so that people identify their solutions?
Yeah, so if someone says, well, is my MFA solution easily phishable or not? Again, they can be phished in many different ways, but the primary way that attackers are using today is this, where they send you a fake link in email. You think you're going to a legitimate website, but you get tricked to going to a fake website. So now the attacker is in between the client and the server, and anything that you send or receive, they can capture. Most MFA is susceptible to what's called man-in-the-middle attacks. And if if someone's I actually have a list of every MFA option that I know of that is not easily phishable that I keep and maintain and update all the time. If you follow me on LinkedIn or you email me at rogerg@noblefor.com, I can send you the list of MFA solutions that are not easily phishable. Again, rogerg@noblefor.com.
I think one of the simple ways of checking is if there is a time lag between getting what it is as your credential and presenting it, that time lag is going to present a window of opportunity for someone in the middle to do some form of attack against you. That's the basic, simple answer, isn't it?
Well, there are some solutions like FIDO where if there's a man-in-the-middle attacker, FIDO literally removes the man-in-the-middle site out of it, because when a FIDO option responds, it actually has a link in it, a signed link that goes, oh, this is where you need to connect. And so it will pull the man-in-the-middle out of it. So it really depends on the solutions, but it depends on the solution.
Okay, thanks for that. Look forward to the other sort of solutions out there, and I'll talk to Joe here. One of the questions was about using RSA key pairs, and we're there looking really at using, if almost, connected tokens or connected readers to read RSA credentials on another device, and like a token or a fob, key fob or something. Do you see those as a valuable replacement, particularly internally within a network?
I think it's complementary. It really comes down to because when you get into things like RSA keepers and PKI solutions, they still are, well, that's great and they enhance the security quite a bit. It does actually put a lot of overhead on the managing of those infrastructures as well. There's a lot of kind of costs to kind of maintain, to rotate those certificates and keep them updated every couple of years. But absolutely, in areas where the higher the risk is and the more sensitive the data, you want to put solutions like that in place because they provide very good protection. They reduce the risk significantly, but they do come with an overhead. So it's all about maintaining that fine balance, and also getting to the point where, as I mentioned earlier, we want to get to where that is for very sensitive systems, where you want to get to zero friction security. It's all about getting that balance for the the everyday user in the organization who really shouldn't have elevated access all the time. You want to get it to on demand. So yes, using solutions like that are good and they reduce the risk. However, they do come with an overhead and support to find the right balance to make sure that you get that you get something that is scalable and also something that you can manage in an organization.
Yeah, in other words, it's the old trade, isn't it, between convenience on the one hand and security on the other. And when you couple that with risk associated with those two factors, then you've got to make those trade-offs. So I tend to agree with your assessment.
Ultimately, what happens is if you make it too complex, people will find ways around it. They will, they'll write things down. They will, use their personal computers to do business. They will forward things outside of the organization, and you start having less visibility. So it's important to make sure that it's about getting that fine balance where security is more in the background, and making sure that at least you're maintaining good visibility. Because once it starts going outside of your visibility, especially into cloud and SaaS and people using BYOD, you start losing that visibility.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks very much, Steve, for that. Thanks very much, Steve, for that, Joe. Sorry, I forgot I was talking there for a moment. Yeah, I just want to go on to one of the issues for Jeff here. Jeff, one of the questions someone asked about was geolocation and what complement that might add to password security. You operate globally for a huge number of clients across the world. Does geolocation figure in your tools and sets you're using?
Yeah, it does. And depending on the type of logins, geolocation-based security, if you use Azure, having conditional access policies layered on top of your authentication strategy that takes into account geographic location, that's great. You can prevent sensitive data access based on the geographic location. I definitely encourage that. I will say, like we talked about before, you need that defense in depth, because there can be spoofing, there can be ways around it, and if somebody's able to compromise, like I mentioned before, a simple token or a cookie, it can contain encoded geographic location that attacker can use from anywhere they want. So it's kind of like MFA. Definitely use it. Definitely take it into account, but don't consider it a silver bullet.
Brilliant. Thanks very much for that, Jeff. Darren, I want to turn to you. There's a really good one on pen tester, which I think I know part of the answer from a UK perspective, but it was all about how you can trust pen testers, how you can trust whether they are good enough, and whether they're certified or not. What's your take on that from working in the US?
Yeah, I think the UK has Crest as a different kind of feel to it. I guess one there is that Crest is government controlled. Over here, the industry is more sort of aligned towards education of like SANS certifications, those kind of area where it's less government involvement. I wouldn't say for obvious reasons, but people tend to trust the UK government for some reason at times. But I always talk about how can you trust a pen tester? Well, you got to look at the experience. Obviously, it helps. That's not to say that me being able to pen test NT4 systems years ago had any great relevance to testing things that we have to test today. But I also think specializations are starting to come out. Like it used to be that you was just a pen tester. Now you've got to be a cloud pen tester. Now you've got to be IoT pen tester. Now so there's a lot more specializations even within just the pen test field. Whereas we used to just be generic. Hey, we could test everything. I've tested like radars and all kinds of weird and wonderful things that come our way. In fact, we tend to be the end result of anything that comes into an organization that weird and wonderful seems to be asked about a pen tester. Can you infect people walking through a door? Well, we don't know, but if you want us to try, we'll give it a go. But it kind of comes down to experience. It kind of comes down to certifications do show a level of commitment. They show a level of expertise, but also, one of the reasons why I built an ecosystem was that I needed to augment the content and the knowledge that the pen tester has. I can't sit there. I'm a product of my own DNA. In other words, my own fingerprints, my own tactics, techniques, and procedures and tooling that I use. I don't know if today something really, really sensitive and cool came out. However, once you move into an ecosystem, maybe in a marketplace where someone adds new content, I can now be augmented. And much like that little ancestry leaf appear, maybe something can appear and say, hey, have you thought about this that someone's doing right now? That's really where we need to get to. Otherwise, the pen tester that you employ is just going to be the DNA of that pen tester. Whereas if you start moving into an environment that's got an ecosystem where we can combine the DNA of thousands of pen testers, then that ecosystem now becomes an army of DNA, an army of pen testers, as opposed to a single one, albeit still augmenting, still using that creativity that's needed.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Steve, for that, Darren. And thank you to all my panelists. That was an excellent conversation, and I really enjoyed it. I think we could have gone for another couple of hours on that topic alone. So, unfortunately, we're coming towards the end of the panel session, and it gives the opportunity for our panelists to give us their final takeaways for the afternoon. And first of all, I'm going to hand over to Darren. Can you give us your takeaway for this evening's conversation, please, Darren?
Yeah, I think, governance, risk, and compliance, and I think also things like business impact analysis, they're pretty dull and boring subjects to pen testers. But the problem is they're super important because they are the institutional knowledge that we need to map and be able to digest the risk and understand the risk that we see. Now, if you're doing it in a one-off photograph pen test, that's going to be super hard to do. But if you can actually incorporate it into continuous testing like we do, then I think it starts to give you a little bit more of an edge. And then you can throw in the mix threat intelligence so you can understand what the bad guys are doing with what the risk we see immediately. You can start to understand what you need to, digest, what you need to fix, what you need to remediate, and get a bigger picture. I always talk about, I'm ex-Navy intelligence. So the value of intelligence diminishes over time. As it rapidly diminishes over time. So that one-off pen test that you've done, that intelligence diminishes very quickly because the world around you is changing quite fast.
Thanks very much, Darren. Over to yourself, Jeff, your takeaway for this evening.
Yeah, and as I mentioned before, I think know your environment. The adversaries today, the ransomware today, it's human operated. They will go in and discover the weaknesses within your environment. So try to get one step ahead of them, identify your risk, identify your data. And of course, that's what Netrix does. We're here to help you, whether you want to check out our products or contact one of our talented staff or myself to help consult you. We're here to help you discover what your risk is so you can try to stay one step ahead of your adversary.
Thanks very much, Jeff. Over to yourself, Joe, your final takeaway this afternoon.
Absolutely. One of the things I definitely recommend is getting as much more knowledge as you possibly can. And one of the things that I've done is the more knowledge you have, the more people you surround yourself and great resources that's available. It can help you give more kind of understanding about what things you can do. And what I've done is, just like Roger, I've created a lot of resources, reading material. So definitely recommend, if you're looking to move beyond passwords and move them more into the background, definitely get a copy of the Privileged Access Management for Dummies book. It's not, I know it's called Dummies, but it's also for smart people. And if you have kids, it's a great, if you need to put the kids to bed at night, definitely recommend reading it to them because they'll be asleep within minutes. So definitely, it's a double thing. It educates you and, gives you an early night with the kids. Also, I've created a lot of resources around, hacking techniques. Inside the mind of a hacker so that you can understand. And one of the resources here is how secure your endpoints, takes it from an ethical hacker view into the thought process that they go through. And that will give you insights because as the whole point of today's talk is really understanding, inside the mind of that hackers kind of steps and the techniques they use. And the more you understand about those techniques, the more things you can put in place to make them more noisy, to make it more difficult, just to make your organization that one step resilient to make it difficult. And also, if you're interested in Active Directory security and hardening as well. And I also do a podcast, which is the 401 Access Denied podcast. If you're interested in staying up to date and connecting with me, definitely subscribe and follow up with some of the great guests that I've got on the show. So more knowledge and more information.
Thanks very much. And if worst comes to worst, it'll always keep the door open as well. Thanks very much, Roger. Your final takeaway, sir.
Is everybody should look at how attackers attack. How do they break into your computers and your environment? Historically, for over 3 decades, social engineering has been number one. Unpatched software has been number 2. The third thing changes over time, but right now it's some sort of password credential theft, credential guessing. I really do think every company should strongly look at the ways that they're most likely to be compromised, broken into, and concentrate in the right amounts to put the right defenses in the right places against the right things.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Roger. And I'd say thank you to all of you. It's been a brilliant conversation this afternoon. And thanks for your time. I'm going to finally hand back to Kelly. Over to you, my dear.
All right. Thank you, Colin. And thank you again to the panelists for a great discussion. I know our audience appreciates all of the great information today. And listeners, for those of you who qualify for CPE credit, your certificate will be issued within 7 days from our learning management system at grccpeacademy.org. So please watch for the email notification on that and check your spam if you don't see that come through. Join us again next month for Attactive Directory, how to overcome exploits and prevent attacks. You can reserve your seat now through the console, but before you do that, do please take a moment to leave us a rating and feedback for today's session. We value feedback and it helps us more in planning for future events. So that's it for today. I'd like to thank our speakers for your participation, with a special thanks to our sponsors, Netrix, KnowBe4, Delinea, and InterVision, without whom this event would not be possible. And of course, thanks once again for listening. Please stay tuned for our next event and see you next time.